Where this is like not how I teach the draw on day one. This is how I try to sharpen your draw on day, whatever, 300 or 1000 or whatever you're at. So first thing I would start with is start positions. You want to cultivate the ability to draw from whatever start position, because who says where your hands are going to be when it's time to draw the gun? You're eating a cheeseburger and it's time to draw the gun, and you're pushing something off the side and then it's time to draw the gun, or your hands are down and it's time to draw the gun, or whatever it is, or you're shooting USPSA and they have all these stupid start positions intended to mess up people like me who have their best start position is just hands at sides, and so they want to mess you up. So they say, okay, your start position is right index finger touching right earmuff, left index finger touching the button on the top of your hat. Okay, whatever. Infinite start positions, right? I would start with, for defensive use, cultivate a start position that is advantageous to you and not telegraphic of the fact that you are about to draw a gun. So if anybody has, which they don't, if they did have strong side holster with an open front cover garment, hands high torso start positions are usually your best ones, because it means that you're starting at count 0.5. If this is count 1, you can start halfway through that at count 0.5 with your strong hand fingers touching your center line, so it's harder to miss the shirt, not grasping the shirt, because that's going to be a threat cue. You don't want to be like, hey bro, come here, as you got the hand picking the shirt. You don't want that, so you can't be grasping the shirt. That tells people that dude, that's a gun dude and they have a gun under there. But hands at center line, or if you have some other position, but hands high torso, you're like halfway through the movement that you have to do for count 1. So I would be suggesting that if any of you were using that mode. And I have no issue with unconcealed range gear. That is completely fine. I have a big tent philosophy for this class with regard to equipment. As long as it's safe and remotely credible, I'm good with it. Everybody. So start infinite start positions, but find something that's advantageous for you. Now, if you're using closed front with an appendix holster, people kind of have different preferences on that. There are people who prefer a hands high start position, and they always clear their shirt by grabbing it up high and bunching it and drawing that way. And that is how I draw when I have a hands higher than hemline start. So if I start up here, yes, that's what I'm doing. My preference, just because I'm the slickest at it, I have the most reps on it, I think I do the best from it, is a normal hands down start position where I clear the shirt that way and draw from there. But either of those are probably going to be pretty good for appendix. I really like just the hands down start. That's not a telegraphic thing. Draw the gun from there. There are some real little advantages, kind of like starting with your fingers touching the center line for open front cover garment. With a closed front cover garment and an appendix holster, there's a big difference in the rate of error I get in messing up clearing the shirt, whether I start with my fingers out in space or touching my leg. That's different. This is not a threat cue. This is the threat cue, and this is not it. There's this versus this. Hands out, I got to reach in and grab the shirt, and that is definitely more error prone for me than if I make my fingers touch my leg. Just fingers are touching the pant leg, already curled in a natural way, and then I just lift and it grabs the shirt much more regularly on the way up. Doesn't mean I never get that error doing that, but I get it less than if I start with fingers away. General character of movement, you want to explode into motion. The Steve Anderson term is like you touched a hot stove. Ow! You need to explode into motion. It is very, very common in the tactical world that you have a perfectly good, safe, structured draw that has some efficiency going for it. It's just not done very quickly. It's just done at like a really relaxed, pokey pace. You draw, like this. And what we want to progress toward, ideally, is doing that same good, efficient, safe structure, but about at the speed that you could move your hands, like about as fast as your hands go. That would be the more ideal thing, and that's what a lot of this is going to be working toward. So that character of motion thing it's very nuanced and subtle, but it's very important. You want to move with hyper speed, but also hyper smoothness, both of those things. To make a martial arts analogy, the energy that you want, you need to have fluidity in your movement. Think of your shooting lockup, which is a Bill Rogers term. So think of your lockup out here, like when you're really firing live fire. This is very tense, right? This is not a relaxed position at all. You're gripping very hard with your hands. There's some amount of tension up in your torso. Mentally, it certainly is probably tense because you're firing live fire, and that's a kind of a tense activity mentally speaking. So you obviously can't have that lockup and tension throughout your draw, right? Because you would be like grinding your way through it, and that won't work. You got to have fluidity to make that thing happen a lot better. but it will ultimately progress into a high state of tension here at the end, or you're not going to be all locked up ready for the multiple shots shooting, right? So there's a progression there. It needs to start fluid and become tense. To use a martial arts analogy, what you probably don't want is the energy of Krav Maga, which in Chinese martial arts terms is all hard energy. Because Krav Maga is like, and then, 50,000 more hammer fists until dude's head is broke or the gun's dropped or whatever, right? That's Krav Maga. My point is not to make a comment about the relative efficacy of that versus another fighting art. That's not my point. My point is with regard to character of movement in handling the gun and especially in drawing the gun. So Krav Maga draw is like, and that's a problem. That's a real big problem. So what you do want is more like Tai Chi. Or maybe Tai Chi on crack, because Tai Chi is usually practiced pretty slowly, and what you want is hyper speed and hyper smooth. So consider this completely arbitrary made-up motion that has nothing to do with any handgun technique other than a demonstration of character of motion. This. You want to go from 0 to maximum fluidity and speed, and then round off to infinite stillness at the end. That is what you want. If that could become the character of your draw, probably that will be a really, really good draw because it's hyper fast and hyper smooth and rounds off into, that's a big key, rounds off into infinite stillness at the end. When I clear the shirt and my master hand starts to move, a couple of things about that. So you might consider experimentation with different master hand paths to the gun. So for me, I might go up, then down. I might go less, up and then in. I might go out then in. I might go in between and neither one. So that was all kind of some different master hand paths to the gun. Usually you say, well, no, you need to have one way, except that doesn't really hold up because of the start position thing. Well, if I draw like this, what happens when my hands are up here? Am I really going to go like that? No, that's circuitous. What you're going to do is you're going to end up coming from a different direction and needing to make that work. If you got an OWB duty holster and sometimes you draw like this, that's going to be one master hand path because your hand started out down here. And other times you drop the field notebook and draw from here and now it's coming from high to low. So you may experiment with that both out of its relevant to different start positions and also because you may find some that end up working better for you than others. So when I start to move, I also make this little gun shape with my master hand. That's not out of a sense of irony of my little gun-shaped hand is going to draw a gun. It's because it pre-stages it to do two main things. One, finger is pre-staged to land and register. That's big and important. Big and very important, right? That's good. Finger pre-staged to land and register. And the two places that usually tactical background practitioners can really stand to gain time on the draw is in more rapid master grip acquisition at the beginning and in more efficient stopping, aiming, and pressing the trigger at the end. Those two places, the beginning and the end, it's not like the middle isn't important, it is, but the beginning and the end are where you have usually as like tactical person, usually a bunch of time left on the table that we could gather back up. So, doing this with my fingers and palm is how I slam my whole hand onto the grip, as opposed to all at once. I'm sure that is a measurable amount of time, but it's close to 0 time from my hands not touching the gun until master grip is pretty much formed. So what will take longer is if you place your palm on the back strap, wrap the fingers onto the front strap, and dive the thumb down into the correct side of the gun. That is going to end up taking longer, probably. Like to the tune of 2 or 3/10 of a second. Doesn't mean you can't have a really excellent draw that way. You can. Slamming my whole master hand on at once, I don't eat that 2 or 3/10 of a second. You may have concern at my thumb not being on the right side, the correct side of the gun. That is a concern, except it's not after careful review. So if I were getting the gun all the way out and it had exited the holster and I still had that, no go, big problem, gotta fix that, we can't have this. But that's not what's actually happening. What's actually happening is as soon as the gun begins to lift, there is space created on that side of the gun and my thumb falls down to the correct side of the gun. Before the muzzle has even left the holster, you couldn't even fire the gun safely yet, and it's in the right place before the gun has left the holster. So you might experiment with that aspect. And that's going to be fairly gun dependent. A gun with a huge beaver tail, like some SIGs and 1911s, might be harder to do that with that beaver tail sticking out. You might end up having to dive it down anyway. That's okay. If that's how it is, that's how it is. But that's a thing that you might experiment with. And generally speaking, the more abbreviated the beaver tail aspect of your pistol is, the more easy it will be to make use of that specific thing. You might balance yourself between two principles: economy of motion and raw speed. Economy of motion is something that we respect a lot in the tactical world, but sometimes raw speed not. I think that a balance between the two is the most productive. So let me do my draw, except I'm going to pause at count 0.5. Look how far out my master hand comes from the gun on the way to getting the grip. There are a couple of reasons for that. So you know how sometimes when you do that pin reset thing on the trigger, like you know how you get taught in early tactical training sometimes that you should hold the trigger back and then only let the trigger forward to the minimum distance necessary to reset the mechanism inside the gun and fire again? Know what I'm talking about? Okay, well, that's ultimately pretty limiting. It's an okay way to introduce people to their different aspects and subparts of the trigger press. There's nothing wrong with that, and they need to know that those parts exist, but they shouldn't mentally confine themselves to only letting the trigger forward to the minimum reset point. You probably do, barring a single action trigger with the very short travel, you probably do want to maintain finger to trigger contact throughout a string of fire. You probably do want to do that, but you probably don't want to minimize the reset to only the minimum point. The reason for that is you get a lot more trigger freeze that way. You know, trigger freeze where you're trying to shoot and you're going bang, 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 and then you're not firing the next shot because you haven't let the trigger reset effectively. I'm not saying I never get it, but one of the ways you get it worse is to adhere to minimum trigger reset. The reason it's worse is there's pressure from the outside. My timer, the dude in the parking lot, whatever. What peer pressure, whatever the pressure, wherever the pressure comes from. The pressure comes from outside, and then you get tense. And when you get tense, you short stroke physical motions. If you only let the trigger forward with zero margin, now you short stroke that, you're on the wrong side of the reset and you're not getting the trigger reset. Boom, there's your trigger freeze. Okay, so same principle here. This is one of the issues with building a technique in slow motion and then thinking it's going to necessarily work done at full speed. The problem is the motion will tend to mutate, and it is because of that tension. So if we for a moment looked at, well, no, just economy of motion wise, what is the most efficient master hand path I could have to the gun? It would be this, right? I mean, that is the shortest distance my hand could go. Okay, but now let's see what happens. Let me see how many tries it takes to generate the error. I mean, I will really try to do it. I got it on the first one. That's the error, is I short stroke the motion when I go from slow motion to full speed, and now I ran my fingers into the belt, and now I'm gonna have to remediate. To hit the grip clean, not only do I come out a little further, I'm coming from the big end of the V, right? If there's a V between my belt and the grip with this appendix carried gun, the narrow end is here. I'm not trying to thread the needle. I'm coming from the big end toward the small end, which again also helps. It also helps with timing the shirt clearance. For this hand to have a slightly more circuitous path, I move both hands as fast as they can right away at the beginning. And because this hand is short path, this hand is longer, more circuitous path, the timing works out and I don't end up getting this so much. So there's some subtleties built in there, and I'm not saying you got to do it that way, but you might experiment with some of these things. I like a balance between, now I'm not just coming all the way out here in some ridiculous violation of economy of motion. There's a balance between raw speed, economy of motion, and margin for error for me. And that results in me bringing my hand about there on the draw. And it's not like it ends up being a slow thing. And what it ends up doing is setting the character for the rest of the draw. If you start with a pokey hand speed here, it's going to be a lot harder to turn it into hyperspeed for the rest of it. It's going to be a lot easier if you simply explode into full motion with maximum fluidity and just get into stillness and tension and shooting lockup there at the end. So now holster position starts to become kind of irrelevant to the discussion. Once the gun is gripped and it's out of the holster, you really do want to join your hands as close to your body as possible, but without causing unnatural segmentation in the draw. So what you don't want is that stopping here to join the hands as close to your body as possible. You want to balance joining them as closely as possible, but without stopping anything. So this. Okay, but you do want them to join close to your body. And the reason that you do is when your support hand joins the grip, it's going to give the gun a giant earthquake. It's hard to notice that when it's back here. The later you join your hands, like the extreme example would be guns all the way out and then I join the hands. I mean, that gun, if I'm watching the sights when I join the support hand, there is a giant earthquake in those sights. Like to the point that if I'm aiming at a person even 7 yards away, the gun is now bounced all the way completely off the target. And during the draw, we want to be very efficient by finalizing aiming and triggering out here at the end, not waiting for this motion to settle. So you want to join your hands as early as possible, without stopping, but as early as possible, so that the earthquake that's going to happen gets done and over with back here, and out here you can just be concentrating on smoothly stopping the gun, aiming the gun, and working the trigger in accordance with the shooting problem that you have. So stopping the gun smoothly, that is a big deal as far as time, efficiency, accuracy of first shot goes. To whatever extent you think I have a good draw on first shot, I'm telling you, huge part of it is going to come from smoothness at stopping the gun, awareness at aiming the gun while it's stopping as opposed to after it has stopped, and integration of good trigger press along with it.
Stand by.